President Joe Biden is set to address the nation later today on his plans for student loan forgiveness. The long-awaited measure is set to include a $10,000 loan forgiveness for those making under $125,000 a year and up to $20,000 for Pell Grant recipients, according to the Washington Post. He is also expected to extend the payment moratorium to December 31st, after midterms.
An analysis done by the Wharton School of Pennsylvania University estimates the student loan forgiveness plan would cost between $300 billion and $980 billion, with the bulk of the relief going toward borrowers in top 60% of earners. Here to discuss is Sparky Abraham, strategist at the Debt Collective and founder of Jubilee Legal. Sparky, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So what do you make of this plan?
It's not enough. There are millions and millions and millions, tens of millions of borrowers with far more than $10,000 in student debt. And I'm very, very happy for the people who will have their entire debt canceled. This is about maybe a third of student debtors will have their whole debt wiped out by this plan. But for the tens of millions of people who will not, unfortunately, they're not going to see a whole lot of relief from it. Their payments are unlikely to decrease or unlikely to decrease much. That's going to depend a little bit on the details, which we're yet to see. But, to me, it just seems like the executive branch is proving that they have the power to fix this extremely unjust problem for all 40-some million people who suffer under it, and they're choosing to do just a fraction, which really, to me, is not enough.
What do you say, Sparky, to people who make this point that this is not the most meritorious group? If you were trying to target lower income workers, this isn't necessarily the kind of debt that you would target. And people who make this argument that it is being paid for by more working class people, and it's a regressive tax, if you will.
Student debt itself is a regressive tax. Student debt is a tax on people who can't afford to pay for college, which generally means people without rich parents. So I don't take that seriously at all. I think all of the discussions around the quote-unquote cost of canceling student debt are extremely confused, including this new study that was just cited. It just came out yesterday. I've only looked briefly at the details, but again, it seems to be citing as the cost, the total principal amount of debt that's being canceled, instead of, for example, the amount that will actually be paid back, or taking into account the current cancellation programs already in effect. And the fact that for a lot of people, I don't know if you all saw, there was a recent New Yorker article by Eleni Shermer that included a borrower named Betty Ann, who was 91 years old and originally took out $30,000 in debt in the 1980s. And now she owes $330,000 in debt. And she's going to die with that debt, and it's going to get canceled via the death discharge, assuming that something else miraculous doesn't happen. To pretend that the cost of canceling Betty's debt is $330,000 is crazy. And I would also say, even if that was the cost on some kind of math, it wouldn't matter to me, because this is unjust debt, and we don't leave people in unjust debt. This is a broken system that can easily be fixed, and it's time to fix it.
I guess what would you say to people like myself who would say, how can it be unjust if people made an exchange in exchange for this amount of money up front so I can get a college degree with the theory that this is going to benefit me in some way, and I'm agreeing to pay this back, and I'm agreeing to pay this interest rate, and where's the unjust component of it come in if it's a voluntary, it's not forced on anyone?
Look, everybody loves to kind of have this idea that whatever you agree to is therefore fair, right? If you agree to something, then it's fine, then it's great. Of course, we know that's not true across the board. There are a lot of things that you are not allowed to agree to, even if you want to agree to them, because we recognize that it's not okay. Indentured servitude is one of those things, right? You generally can't agree to be an indentured servant, even if you walk into it knowing everything.
Selling your kidneys.
I would legalize selling your kidneys.
I know you would, Robbie. We know you would. Child labor, a lot of things that people will contract toward, and we have labor laws exactly for those reasons. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think that, we can talk about the fact that people are misled about the likelihood of, how they're going to benefit from taking on student debt compared to the cost. We can talk about the cost of college. We can talk about all of these things, but at the bottom, at the heart of this, to me, this is about education. Education is a public good. We do all of our education, except for higher education, as a public, universal, free at the point of service program. And higher education was going that direction until essentially Ronald Reagan came in and said, no, students need to have some reason to not protest the Vietnam War. And we need to be able to keep Black and brown students out of college and not be forced to desegregate. And this is the genesis of the student loan system as we know it. And so, no, I don't think that people's agreement to the debt is all that relevant here. The fact is that millions and millions of people are suffering under this for education, merely for going to school when they couldn't afford to pay for it up front. And that's just not the way that education can or should work. It's not the way it works in other countries, and it's not the way we should keep running it.
Yeah, when you were talking, I was thinking also of payday loans. There are all of these examples with really exploitative and usurious arrangements with credit card companies where people have to pay extremely high interest rates, whether it's a payday loan, whether it's some of these high interest credit cards that disproportionately prey on poor people who need cash fast and are willing to give up basically 40% of their paycheck in order to get the money when they need it to prevent evictions and things like that. And obviously, I think people who say, well, let's attack credit card debt, let's get at car loans, let's get at mortgage debt, that's more justified debt. I personally don't know how you feel, Sparky. I would say totally. Let's prioritize that. But the difference is that Joe Biden would have to get congressional authority to do those kinds of things. And this happens to be a kind of debt, which because it is a problem of the federal government's own making, issuing these federally backed loans, that he has the ability to take care of. But Sparky, I want to ask you, you speak so compellingly about historical precedents for this kind of action, specifically precedents that are found in spiritual traditions like the debt jubilee. Can you explain what a debt jubilee is?
Yeah, of course. So a debt jubilee traditionally is a ritual and regular clearing of debt, setting people back to equal, essentially, getting back to a point where, we recognize that the commitments that we make, particularly around debt and around labor, cannot be things that tie people down for their entire lives. We can't allow someone to commit to something at 18 that is then going to make their life significantly worse when they're 40 or 50. These things have to have a time limit. And a lot of societies in the past have recognized that, including in biblical societies where there was this idea of a jubilee, which happened every 7 years. I think not coincidentally, 7 years is a amount of time that gets carried into the legal context of debt in the United States in various ways, including, for example, that's how long derogatory information can appear on your credit report. So all of this is a very long-standing understanding that, debt is a means of social control. And leaving people under this form of social control for decades, for their entire lives in some instances, is just extremely unfair and honestly self-destructive to a society. We're tying people down. And, related to that point, I saw a study, I'm blanking on who it was from, but I can send it after the fact, but basically about what people did after their student debt was discharged, either via the existing cancellation programs or via bankruptcy, which is very difficult but not impossible for student debt. And what the study found is that they paid off other debts that were holding them down as well, and they moved jobs. They were able to change jobs and get better jobs as a result of not being essentially indentured by their student debt. And that's something that happened for me too, right? I mean, this payment pause allowed me to actually leave my job and start my own law practice and work officially with the debt collective. And I wouldn't have been able to do that but for the payment pause. And, I want that for everyone. I think everyone needs that. Everyone deserves it.
And Sparky, what do you say to this argument that says, it is going to rich kids? I'm perhaps the world's worst spokesperson for this because I am an unsympathetic case. And to be really, really clear, none of these debt forgiveness policies have anything to do with me or my debt. I have grad school debt, which is not being implicated in any of this. But I wonder what you had a somewhat different trajectory than me, Sparky. And I wonder what you make of this argument that says that people who took out debt to go to college are rich and privileged, and this is something that's coming at the expense of working class people who didn't have that opportunity.
This is wrong on so many levels. So number one, you might have gone to college with some rich kids. I definitely went to college with some rich kids. They did not take out student debt. Right. Rich kids do not take out student debt. If you have enough money to pay for college up front, you pay for it up front. And people who have student debt don't necessarily even have college degrees. So if we move, what the argument shifts to is like, okay, well, yes, maybe they weren't rich when they went to college, but college degrees mean you have an increase in your income, and therefore, you're on the higher end of the spectrum if you have a college degree. course, 40% of people with student debt don't have college degrees.
Right.
So that doesn't even apply to them. And actually, if you look at that Penn Wharton study that was cited earlier, the framing in some of the tweets is, oh, this cancellation is going to go to the top 60% of earners. And you think about that for a second, you go, wait, top 60%? You look at the numbers again, and it's also true that the cancellation mostly benefits the bottom 60% of earners, because mostly it benefits the middle. So it's all about, okay, well, how do you want to try to spin this? But the fact is that, well, I guess one other thing to say, which is that if you can also look at comparisons between the income of people with college degrees who took out student debt and with college degrees who didn't take out student debt. And surprise, surprise, people with college degrees who did not take out student debt have far higher income after college because they started out rich, and that's how a class system works. So if what you're concerned about is making sure that rich people pay their fair share into our common social project, the way to go about that is through the tax system. It's not through this weird monstrosity of a debt tax imposed only on people who want to get education but can't afford it. Just do an income tax.
But why does that become, the way we're doing it now, it becomes essentially the taxpayer's liability, people who maybe didn't go to college, I mean, for whom a group of people who took out loans to go to college and then didn't bother finishing college and are now in debt are probably not a tremendously sympathetic group of people, to be frank.
Say that all you want. I talk to people every single day. People call and email me who are having their Social Security disability benefits garnished for their student debt, who are completely stuck in their lives, who are making little or no money with absolutely no chance of paying off their six-figure student debt, who are desperate. People, it's very hard to express to people who are not in this situation and who are not regularly in contact just how miserable this issue of student debt makes people feel in their lives, and just how trapped they feel with absolutely no escape. And so you can generalize, but go talk to people about this. Have folks on the show. We just started, the Debt Collective just launched a 50 over 50 strike of debtors who are over 50 years old, who are deep in student debt with no chance of ever getting out of it. Have them on the show and ask them about why they're so privileged. Bring Betty Ann on the show and ask her about her privilege.
Yeah. Look, I'll say this, I won't deny my own relative privilege in this world, but I talked to my mom about this a lot. I was a first-generation college graduate, and she talks about how she almost was derailed from finishing her degree because she couldn't come up with $400 to pay for the semester one semester. And for $400, Howard wasn't going to let her enroll in classes. She took the semester off. She worked as a legal secretary in college and was able to come back the next year. But a lot of people who are derailed in those ways, life happens, family happens, all kinds of things happen, and they become permanently derailed. And folks will often tell you, I would love to have finished my degree. I would have loved to have gone back to college, but I wasn't able to do so because I simply wasn't able to come up with the money. And it feels like punishing people for being poor is not exactly how we want to run our education system. Sparky, I hope people do continue to follow you and listen to you. I think you're a very compelling advocate for your cause. Obviously, I've spoken to you on Bad Faith Podcast quite a few times. And thank you for joining us here today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I would encourage everybody to go to debtcollective.org. If you are happy about whatever cancellation happens, all of that starts with the Corinthian 15 student debt strike. So please go check out the website.
Thanks, Sparky. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.